The Martian sunset cast a dim, blood-red hue over the shattered remains of the once thriving colony. To an outsider, the city might have looked like a war zone, its towering structures reduced to skeletal remains, jagged and abandoned. But to Captain Thomas Doyle, perched on a rooftop in the heart of it all, the landscape was nothing more than an opportunity, a hunting ground. The winds whispered between broken windows, kicking up dust that seemed to stain the air permanently. It was a reminder of what had been lost, and what he was about to protect. Tom's breath was steady, his pulse calm, despite the urgency of the mission. He could feel the weight of the sniper rifle against his shoulder, the cold metal familiar in his hands. He adjusted the scope, scanning the barren street below. Through the lenses, the world was reduced to pinpoint details, dust motes swirling in the wind, the distant shimmer of Martian rock, and the occasional flicker of movement from the alien mercenaries that prowled the streets. The enemy was out there. Somewhere. Control, this is Falcon 1. Do you have a visual on my targets? His voice was low, a mere whisper, but the comms crackled back with crisp authority. Falcon 1, this is Control. Your targets are in position. We have a confirmed sighting of Rooftop and his black sons. They're moving along the main thoroughfare. We estimate 10 minutes until they reach the supply cache. Do not engage unless given the green light. Tom's eyes narrowed behind the visor of his helmet. The Black Suns were mercenaries, ruthless, calculated, and deadly. They had been hired by rival alien factions to disrupt the human presence on Mars, and their mission was simple: destroy everything in their path. Humanity's foothold in the galaxy depended on stopping them here, before they could tear down the last remaining human stronghold. The voice of Sergeant Lee, his spotter, came over the comms, breaking his focus. Tom, the way they're swaggering around down there, those bastards don't even know we're here. It's almost like they're mocking us. Tom's lips curled into a slight, humorless smile. Let them. They'll find out soon enough. The aliens were mocking them. He could feel it in the air, a palpable sense of arrogance that emanated from the mercenaries. These creatures had seen humans as a nuisance at best, nothing more than a fleeting presence in the grand scheme of the galaxy. They underestimated them. They laughed at them. Rooftop, the leader of the Black Suns, strutted down the street like a king marching toward his throne. He was a hulking figure, an alien of sleek, dark carapace skin, the texture reminiscent of jagged obsidian. His eyes glowed with an eerie yellow hue, an almost predatory gleam dancing in his gaze. His soldiers flanked him, various species from across the galaxy, each clad in combat gear, their weapons gleaming with deadly intent. They laughed as they walked, clearly unbothered by the threat of human snipers. Humans! Pathetic! Roothtop's voice reverberated through the comms, though Tom knew it was intended for his mercenaries. Let them try to shoot us. One by one, they'll fall before our superior might. Tom exhaled slowly, the sound of his breath echoing softly in his helmet. The alien's arrogance was exactly what he had been waiting for. The moment he had trained for, the one he had prepared for his entire life, was now within his grasp. Sergeant Lee's voice returned, less amused this time. You heard that right? They think they own the place. They do for now, Tom muttered, watching through the scope. His finger hovered above the trigger, but he remained patient. The Black Suns were still too far. Still too oblivious. Minutes ticked by, each second stretching out like an eternity as the mercenaries continued their mocking parade. Tom's mind sharpened with each breath, his calculations running silently in the back of his mind. The wind was picking up, swirling the Martian dust in unpredictable ways. He adjusted his aim slightly, compensating for the shift. Patience was key. He had the perfect angle, the perfect shot, but it wasn't time yet. The Black Suns continued their march. Rooftop laughed again, his voice carrying over the comms. I'll allow this human sniper to take his best shot. He won't find us. We'll show him why the galaxy has never feared your species. Tom's eyes narrowed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Control, I've got a clean shot, he murmured. Falcon 1, hold your fire, came the reply, curt and unemotional. Wait for the green light. Tom's teeth clenched. Every instinct told him to pull the trigger now, to silence the mockery that was coming from the alien leader. But he knew better. He had learned the hard way that impulsive action could destroy everything. His orders were clear. Wait. The minutes dragged on. Finally, the signal came, a simple command, yet one that meant everything. Green light. Control's voice came through, steady as ever. Tom's gaze never wavered from Theric, his heart slowing as if in preparation. The world narrowed to the target in front of him. The enemy mercenaries were about to learn what it meant to underestimate humanity. He exhaled, his finger pressing gently against the trigger. The sound of the rifle's discharge echoed across the barren city, a sharp crack that broke the silence of the Martian air. Theric's head exploded into a cloud of dark, viscous fluid, his body crumpling to the ground with an unceremonious thud. The remaining mercenaries froze in shock, their leader's death sudden and brutal. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but stillness. And then the chaos erupted. "Control, target neutralized," Tom said, his voice devoid of any emotion. The moment he spoke, the Black Suns scrambled, their formation breaking apart as they searched frantically for cover. But it was too late. The sniper's shot had made its point. Humanity wasn't to be underestimated. "Nice shot, Tom," Lee said, a smirk in her voice. "But we both know the real fun's just starting." Tom allowed himself a small grin, watching the mercenaries scatter like ants. He knew what would come next. They would retaliate, but the hunt had begun, and he was always ready for the next move. "Let's give them a taste of what it means to mess with humanity." As the rest of the Black Suns scrambled to regroup, Tom Doyle took his rifle off his shoulder and prepared for the next phase of the operation. This was only the beginning. The air on Mars was thin, and Tom Doyle felt it in his lungs. But he'd long since learned to ignore the discomfort of the atmosphere. His body had adapted, like it adapted to everything else in this unforgiving world. What mattered now was the sight in front of him, the shattered remnants of the Black Suns. Theric's death had thrown them into disarray, but Tom knew better than to think they'd crumble so easily. These mercenaries were vicious, ruthless, and they weren't going to let a single sniper take them down. He adjusted his position, the cold metal of his sniper rifle pressed against his shoulder. The Martian wind howled, whipping up dust and debris across the barren landscape. It was a perfect cover, if only for a few moments. Tom's scope tracked the mercenaries as they scrambled for cover, but their movements were erratic, frantic, and they had no clear leader to follow. For now, they were just targets. His comms buzzed with Sergeant Lee's voice, steady as ever. "Tom, they're splitting up. Half of them are heading toward the industrial complex, the others toward the eastern barracks. We can't let them regroup. You're up." Tom scanned the area once more. It was chaotic, but it was still manageable. He exhaled slowly, taking in the scene. There were at least 12 Black Suns left, their weapons drawn, their panicked eyes scanning for their fallen leader's body. But it was the quiet ones that were dangerous. Tom had learned that the hard way. "Understood," he replied, the words clipped precise. His mind raced as he adjusted his aim, focusing on the closest group moving toward the barracks. His finger hovered over the trigger, but something in his gut told him to wait. Patience was always the key. A sniper's job wasn't to be first, it was to be right. He knew what would happen next. They'd try to flank him. They'd attempt to force him out into the open. He'd seen this before, mercenaries who thought they could outthink a lone sniper. They'd make a mistake, and Tom would capitalize on it. But as he shifted slightly to maintain his angle, a low, growling laugh came through his comms, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Did you think you could kill our leader and walk away unscathed, human?" Theric's voice, cold and mocking, echoed in his earpiece. Tom's eyes narrowed. The alien's voice was unsettling, but it was more than that. The fact that Theric was dead didn't matter. The Black Suns were still operating with military precision. There was no panic in their ranks. They had already regrouped, and now they were playing him. "Control, we've got company," Tom said, watching as several of the Black Suns began to fan out in search of him. "They're adapting faster than I thought." We're tracking their movements, Lee's voice replied. You've got 3 of them moving north, and the rest are flanking from the east. Do what you do best, Tom. His heartbeat quickened. The game had changed. What had been a simple sniper hunt was now a tactical dance. The Black Suns were better organized than expected. They had recalibrated too quickly. But Tom wasn't about to let them take the upper hand. He repositioned his rifle, taking care to move slowly and silently. His body was like a shadow against the backdrop of Mars's desolate landscape, every movement deliberate, calculated. He had a plan. The first group would be the easiest to eliminate, but the real challenge would be the eastern flank. They were already closing in. He could feel it. Through the scope, he could see the first 2 mercenaries, their heads just barely visible over a pile of wrecked machinery. They moved in sync, as if they knew exactly where to go. The third was still further out, hanging back to cover the retreat. It was a textbook strategy. They knew he was out here, and they weren't about to let him pick them off one by one. Tom took a deep breath, his fingers slipping onto the trigger. He lined up the shot. The first mercenary crumpled in a spray of red mist, his body slumping to the ground. His partner spun around, weapon raised, but it was too late. A second shot rang out, and the second mercenary fell in an instant. The remaining one hesitated, looking around for cover, but Tom was already repositioning. 2 down, he muttered, his voice barely audible. His eyes tracked the eastern flank, where he knew the rest of them were waiting. He could hear them now, the sound of boots scraping against debris, the soft whispers of their communicators. They were getting closer. Control, I need a diversion, Tom said, his tone calm but urgent. I'm not going to make it out if they keep closing in. Copy that, came the reply. We're deploying drone support. You've got 5 minutes. Tom nodded to himself. 5 minutes was more than enough. In that time, he would need to eliminate at least half of the remaining mercenaries. He adjusted his position, his body contorting into a more comfortable yet strategic stance. The eastern flank was almost in range, and he could see the first 2 aliens creeping closer, their weapons ready. He took another breath, slowing his heart rate. The next shot had to be perfect. And then, just as he was about to fire, a bright light flashed across the horizon. A drone, small, fast, and silent, swooped down, drawing the attention of the remaining mercenaries. They were momentarily distracted, their heads snapping toward the sky, giving Tom the opening he needed. He squeezed the trigger once more. The first mercenary collapsed in a heap, his body jerking violently as the round tore through his chest. The second one didn't even have time to react before the bullet hit him in the throat, sending him tumbling backward. 4 down, Tom said, a slight edge of satisfaction in his voice. He reloaded his rifle swiftly, setting his sights on the final group. Only 4 left. But even as he took aim, the remaining mercenaries weren't making it easy. They were methodical, waiting for him to show himself. The problem was that Tom had already done his part. He wasn't going to be seen again, not unless he wanted to be. The eastern flank was getting close. Tom could feel the sweat trickling down the back of his neck. But he wouldn't let them have it. Not today. Control, I'm moving in, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. The drone above continued its surveillance, but Tom was the one in control now. His next move would decide it all. He wasn't just going to outwit them. He was going to make sure they would never forget the price of underestimating humanity. The cold Martian dust swirled in the air as Tom Doyle slid into position, the familiar weight of his sniper rifle steady against his chest. His eyes never left the group of Black Sun's mercenaries that had taken cover behind a row of collapsed building frames. The sound of the drones above, silent but always present, buzzed in his ear like a persistent reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. He had pushed them back, eliminated several of their ranks, but Rutherikest's death was only the beginning. The true test was now. The Black Suns weren't mere soldiers. They were mercenaries, hardened by years of combat. They would retaliate, regroup, and come back harder. Through the scope, Tom could see the faintest movement, A mercenary's hand gripping the edge of a shattered window. His target. The tension in his muscles coiled, but he held back. The first shot could be the last if he didn't make it count. "Control, I've got them in sight," Tom said, his voice a whisper over the comms. "What's the plan?" "Keep pushing," came the reply from Sergeant Lee. "They're getting desperate. Your job's to make them feel cornered." Tom's lips tightened in a grim smile. Cornered animals were always the most dangerous. But that's exactly where he wanted them. The mercenaries were moving in a calculated formation. They'd split into two groups, one advancing toward the industrial sector, the other crawling through the wreckage near the eastern barracks. The sound of their boots crunching against Martian rock echoed in Tom's ears. He had them now. They were too spread out to be a true threat, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try something unexpected. His eyes focused on the group to the east. There were 3 mercenaries in this cluster. The first, a tall creature with a silvery exoskeleton, was crouched low behind a pile of debris. The second, a humanoid figure with a curved, blade-like weapon strapped to his back, was scanning the horizon. The third, the one Tom had been tracking for the last few minutes, was a lanky alien with a weapon too large for his frame, constantly adjusting his grip as though his nerves were getting the better of him. Tom's finger hovered over the trigger. Patience. One mistake, and it would all fall apart. Just then, the mercenary with the weapon moved into a slight clearing. Tom exhaled, adjusting his aim. The world slowed down. His scope aligned with the target's head. A shot rang out. The mercenary collapsed in a spray of red mist, his body crumpling lifelessly to the ground. The others froze. Tom didn't wait. He quickly shifted his position, scanning the other mercenaries. They had split up, but their movements were still frantic, the remnants of Tharakest's death weighing heavily on their shoulders. "They know we're here," Lee said over the comms. "They're going to change tactics." "I've got that covered," Tom replied, already moving to the next spot. With the first kill, the hunt had shifted. The mercenaries were no longer operating with the arrogance they had earlier. Fear, or at least caution, had crept in. This was when they made mistakes. This was when they showed weakness. The second group, moving toward the industrial sector, had only 2 mercenaries left. The rest of their team had scattered, likely to draw Tom's attention. The human element, it was always the same. It was their pride. Their confidence that everything could be controlled with a few well-laid plans. Tom was ready to show them how wrong they were. The next shot came quickly. One of the 2 remaining mercenaries stumbled out of cover, reaching for his communicator. But his last mistake was underestimating the silent threat in the shadows. Tom's bullet found its mark, and the mercenary dropped without a sound. The second mercenary, realizing the danger, made a desperate run for the industrial complex. But he wasn't fast enough. Tom had already anticipated the move, his rifle tracking the retreating figure. With one clean shot, the last of the group fell. "That's 6," Tom muttered to himself, barely feeling the weight of the action. The rush of the kill had long since faded. This was a mission, not a hunt. He needed to stay focused. He checked the comms again. "Control, status update?" Lee's voice came back, a slight edge in her tone. "We've detected movement. The last group of Black Suns is closing in. They're trying to regroup." Tom's eyes narrowed. The last group. There was no more room for mistakes. He quickly scanned the skyline. The remaining mercenaries were working together now, moving in synchronized formations. There were 6 left, including the 2 Black Suns who had been covering their escape. They were acting with purpose now, no longer relying on brute strength and arrogance. They'd learned quickly, but they were also making one critical error. They were predictable. Tom's gaze locked onto a mercenary carrying an experimental energy rifle, the latest in alien tech, designed for heavy-duty combat. It was a unique piece of weaponry, and it was far too dangerous to let it remain in enemy hands. Tom knew what needed to be done. The rifle had to go. He repositioned himself to a new vantage point, tracking the mercenaries' movements with precision. This one wouldn't be easy. The mercenary was smart, covering his tracks, staying in constant motion. But Tom wasn't after the easy kill, he was after something more. Tom shifted his aim. The rifle had a target, but not yet. He needed the mercenary to stop. He needed him to make that one fatal mistake. The mercenary paused for just a second, too close to the edge of the industrial complex. That was all Tom needed. His fingers squeezed the trigger, and the energy rifle exploded in a ball of fiery sparks, the mercenary thrown back by the impact. His comrades, who had been behind him, scattered in surprise. Tom's voice came over the comms, calm and measured. 7 down. 1 left. The remaining mercenary, a tall, broad-shouldered alien with an armored exoskeleton, had seen enough. He wasn't waiting for backup. The last black sun, now exposed and isolated, sprinted toward cover, but Tom already had him locked in his scope. This was the final test. Tom had tracked and killed, outsmarted and outplayed. But now it was time to end it. He took a slow breath, steadying his hand. The mercenary darted from one hiding spot to another, trying desperately to find safety in the ruins. But there was no escape now. He was already dead. With a single shot, the last Black Sun mercenary fell, his body crumpling against the broken walls of the industrial sector. Mission complete, Tom said, his voice neutral. Area secure. The battlefield fell silent. All that remained was the distant hum of the drones above and the soft crunch of Martian dust beneath his boots. Well done, Falcon 1, Lee said, a hint of admiration in her voice. They didn't know what hit them. Tom didn't respond. There was no need for congratulations. The job was done, but the war was far from over. There were more mercenaries, more threats to deal with, and more blood to spill. But for now, he allowed himself one moment of calm. Humanity had sent a message today, and Tom Doyle had been the one to deliver it. The sun had long since set, leaving the Martian sky in a wash of dusky red and fading purple. Silence hung heavy over the battlefield, the only sound the occasional hum of the drones still hovering overhead. Tom Doyle crouched low behind a jagged slab of concrete, his breathing steady as he surveyed the wreckage of the Black Suns. The last of them were still out there, 2 mercenaries, hiding in the shadow of a collapsed dome structure. They hadn't yet realized that they were now surrounded. Tom's eyes narrowed as he studied their movements. They were desperate now, trying to regroup after the chaos he had unleashed upon them. The entire mercenary force was down to these last 2. They were skilled, but they weren't the same well-coordinated unit they had been under Ruthericus' leadership. The death of their commander had shaken them more than they were willing to admit. Control, I've got 2 targets remaining, Tom said, his voice calm, betraying no hint of the adrenaline that thrummed through his veins. They're trying to find cover in the northern sector. Requesting orders. The reply was almost immediate. We've got eyes on them, Falcon 1. The northern sector's compromised. We need to neutralize them now. Don't let them escape. Tom's gaze flickered over the wreckage of the city. There was no escape. They just didn't know it yet. He adjusted his rifle, the familiar weight a steady comfort in his hands. The wind was picking up, swirling the dust in unpredictable gusts. It would be a challenge to line up the shot, but not an insurmountable one. Tom had faced far worse. These last 2 mercenaries were no different from the others. The only thing that had changed was the stakes. Understood, Tom replied, slipping the rifle onto his shoulder. He crouched lower, moving swiftly and silently through the debris, his eyes never leaving the distant figures. The first mercenary, a tall, insected creature with sharp mandibles and an armored exoskeleton, was crouched behind a concrete pillar. The second, a wiry, agile alien, was peeking around a corner, weapon raised, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Tom knew that the longer he took to act, the more time they would have to regroup and counterattack. It was time to finish this. He made his way around the edge of a fallen building, keeping to the shadows as he neared his position. The closer he got, the more the tension in his chest tightened. Every step, every breath, felt calculated. He couldn't afford to be careless now. The Black Suns had learned quickly, and they were no longer the laughingstock they had been earlier. He paused, lowering to one knee and adjusting the scope on his rifle. The mercenaries hadn't noticed him yet. The pillar and the corner provided adequate cover, but they were still exposed enough to be vulnerable. He let his breath out slowly, lining up the first shot. A sharp crack of gunfire split the air as Tom squeezed the trigger. The first mercenary never had a chance to react. The bullet hit him square in the chest, the impact sending him flying backward into the debris. His weapon clattered to the ground, a useless piece of tech in a moment of defeat. The second mercenary, alerted by the sound, whipped around to face the direction of the shot. His eyes darted wildly, scanning for Tom, but it was too late. Tom had already repositioned himself, anticipating the move. Another shot rang out. The second mercenary's body jerked violently, his weapon falling from his hands as he crumpled to the ground. The wind carried his final, silent scream away before it could even be heard. "Targets neutralized," Tom said into his comms, his voice cold and detached. There was no celebration. There was no victory. Just the quiet aftermath of a job well done, but with no illusion of peace to follow. Tom stood and began his slow, methodical approach to the fallen mercenaries, his boots crunching softly against the Martian dirt. He paused by the body of the insectoid mercenary, kneeling to check the pulse. No life. The kill had been clean. His rifle had done its job, as it always did. "Falcon 1 mission complete. Area is secure," Tom reported, his voice flat, as though he were reading off a checklist. Sergeant Lee's voice came through the comms, the edge of tension in her tone finally melting into something softer. "Good work, Tom. You kept your head in the game when it mattered." Tom didn't respond immediately. His eyes lingered on the fallen mercenaries. The Black Suns were gone, but that didn't mean the danger had passed. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on him. The battle was over, but the war was far from it. The galaxy didn't care that a few mercenaries had been wiped out. The Black Suns would be replaced. Another group would rise to take their place. And humanity would still be in their crosshairs. Tom stood, wiping the dust from his hands and surveying the ruined cityscape. It had been a long day, one that had tested him like few others, but he had done what was necessary. He had struck a blow for Earth's survival. The Black Suns would not soon forget the cost of underestimating humanity. But that didn't mean he was satisfied. "Control," Tom said, his voice quieter now, though the tension still lingered beneath. "We've won this battle, but we're far from finished. Are there any other threats on the horizon?" "Not at the moment," Lee replied, but there was an underlying note of uncertainty in her voice. "The Black Suns are down, but we'll need to regroup and reassess. The war isn't over, Tom." He didn't need to hear the rest. He had known it all along. The war was never over. There were always more mercenaries, always more threats waiting to take their place. Humanity's fight for survival would continue as long as there were enemies who saw them as weak. "Understood," Tom said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I'll be ready." The comms clicked off, and Tom Doyle stood alone in the Martian ruins. He could hear the distant hum of the drones overhead, a reminder that the mission was only one small part of a larger war. The city around him was a graveyard, for the Black Suns, for the fallen, for those who fought and died on this barren world. But for Tom, it was just another battlefield. And there would be more. The Black Suns had fallen. But the fight had only just begun. The silence that followed the battle felt heavier than the gunfire that had filled the air moments before. Tom Doyle stood at the center of the wreckage, the lifeless bodies of the Black Suns strewn around him like discarded dolls. His rifle hung loosely from his shoulder, and the weight of his actions was finally beginning to settle in. The Martian winds picked up, swirling dust around his boots as he surveyed the field. It was over. For now. The war wasn't something that could be won with a single strike. The Black Suns had been dangerous, but they were only one faction in the growing galaxy of enemies humanity faced. Tom's eyes narrowed as he looked around, his mind running through the calculations. How many more mercenaries were out there? How many other forces were waiting for the right moment to strike? Control. He spoke into his comms, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of exhaustion. The Black Suns are down. The area is secure, but this is far from over. The response was immediate. Copy that, Falcon 1. Excellent work. We're still gathering intel on other factions in the region, but we need to assess the long-term impact of Tharik's death. Tom's brow furrowed at the mention of the mercenary leader's name. Tharik's death had been a pivotal moment, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. The Black Suns were a significant threat, but they were a symptom of a much larger problem. Humanity was facing a full-scale galactic struggle, one that couldn't be solved by a few tactical victories. We'll need to fortify the perimeter, Tom said, his eyes scanning the horizon, where the ruins of the colony stretched out before him. And I don't want any more surprises. These mercenaries might have underestimated us, but the next group won't. There was a brief pause on the other end before Sergeant Lee responded. Agreed. We're sending reinforcements to the colony in the next few hours. Stay vigilant, Tom. Tom nodded, though he knew she couldn't see him. Understood. The weight of the situation was sinking in. It was a strange feeling for Tom, the awareness that, no matter how many mercenaries he took down, it wouldn't stop the conflict from continuing. Humanity's place in the galaxy was under constant threat, and each battle was only another skirmish in an ongoing war. He was a soldier. He fought, he killed, and he moved on. But there was a part of him, a part he refused to acknowledge, that wondered if it was all worth it. He turned away from the battlefield, his boots kicking up red dust as he walked toward the makeshift command center they had set up amidst the ruins. The building was little more than a few hastily constructed walls and a communications array, but it served its purpose. The rest of his team was waiting there, reviewing the aftermath, processing the data, and preparing for what came next. As he approached, Sergeant Lee looked up from her console. Her face was etched with fatigue, her eyes heavy but sharp. She hadn't had the luxury of a moment's peace since the beginning of the conflict, and neither had Tom. The cost of war wasn't just measured in casualties. It was measured in the quiet toll it took on every soldier involved. How's the damage? Tom asked, slipping into the chair beside her. Lee sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. Minimal for now. We've secured the colony's central reactor, but we still don't have full intel on the surrounding factions. The Black Suns were a problem, but we've still got bigger fish to fry. And we can't keep ignoring the fact that Tharik's death might spark more than just retaliation. Yeah, Tom said, his gaze distant as he ran a hand through his hair. It's never just retaliation. It's about control, power. The Black Suns were mercenaries, but they were part of something bigger. We're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for the future. Lee nodded in agreement. Exactly. And we need to be ready for whatever comes next. The room fell into a moment of silence as both of them processed the reality of the situation. The fight was far from over. The Black Suns were just one faction, one group among many. The galaxy was teeming with those who would see humanity driven from the stars. But in that moment, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had held their ground. They had shown that humanity wasn't to be underestimated. Control. Tom spoke again, his voice clear and authoritative. We've neutralized the immediate threat, but I'm not leaving until we have a full sweep of the area. I'll be taking my team to the eastern sector to make sure there are no stragglers. Copy that, Falcon 1. We're counting on you, came the reply. Tom stood and began to move toward the door. His team was waiting for him, ready to continue the fight. But as he walked, his thoughts turned inward. It wasn't the first time he'd been in a situation like this. He'd fought in countless battles, watched friends and comrades fall, and kept pushing forward because that's what soldiers did. But there was something different about this one. This war wasn't just about tactical victories. It was about something more, the survival of humanity, the protection of Earth's legacy. He paused at the door, his fingers lingering on the handle. The battle was over, but the war was far from it. He knew this mission had been critical, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of something far darker, far more dangerous. "Let's move out," he called over his shoulder, the command flowing naturally from him. "We've got a job to finish." His team responded with quiet resolve, gathering their gear and preparing to move. They knew the stakes. They knew the cost of failure. And they weren't about to let it happen. As they walked into the Martian dusk, the desolate city behind them, Tom couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. They had struck a blow against the Black Suns. But what about the others? The ones who were still out there, lurking in the shadows? For now, he pushed those thoughts aside. He had a job to do. And as long as there was a fight to be fought, Tom Doyle would be there. He was humanity's shield, the one who would hold the line, no matter the cost. The war for survival had only just begun.